Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give a second for the waiting room to start to let people in. I see it slowly starting to fill up. So we'll just give everybody a second to join in, and we'll start in about 30 seconds to get everybody going. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar. We are here to announce some new exciting resources around the NYTD portfolio of work at the Children's Bureau. These resources were all created with our NYTD experts with lived experience. So just a few housekeeping notes as we begin this webinar today. We are recording this, and we will unlock the chat feature of the Teams channel at the end of the webinar to allow an open discussion for Q&As section within the webinar. We're just keeping it closed right now to keep the distractions to a minimum. So I'd like to welcome everybody again to this webinar. I'm Catherine Kulbicki. I'm a social scientist at the Children's Bureau, and I oversee the NYTD review work. And again, I'd like to thank you for attending the webinar. The purpose of this webinar today is to announce a new series of products that are posted to the Children's Bureau website this morning. These products are called NYTD in Practice. We expect the series of products to continue to grow and be regularly updated as we continue to address the needs of the states. We hope to grow these products as a need basis. And again, we see all these products as being really important to keep updated and regularly communicating this information, because a lot of these products are focused on the engagement of young people. So all of these products were developed today with lived expertise experts who are all also trained to be NYTD reviewers. And to be a NYTD reviewer, they go out on the federal NYTD review team and are an intricate part of understanding about what goes on with the states during their NYTD practices. So these documents have been newly developed in collaboration, and they have been collaborated with between CB, the Children's Bureau, JPS, and the NYTD reviewers. And so all of these documents were created from the beginning to the end with lived expertise through the design, the conception, through the writing of these products. And we're really hoping that this model serves as a great model for other states and jurisdictions to use this to continue to create resources for their own states and purposes around NYTD. So we can go to the next slide. So I have the great honor today of introducing our participants. And so all of these participants were actively engaged throughout the whole creation of these new products. And I'd like to welcome Timothy Bells, Kayla Powell, Haley Dell, Leroy Barrows Santos, Elliot Hinkle, and Maya Harry from JBS. So I will turn it over to Tim to introduce himself. And again, I'd like to thank all the presenters and all of the writers who worked on all these documents, as they are really exciting that they're a new portfolio of work for CB.
Hi, everyone. This is Tim Belseth. I'm calling in from Texas. I've been a part of NYTD in multiple capacities since 2012 with my state here in Texas, but I've also been a part of NYTD reviews in 7 states and also helped train new NYTD reviewers. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Kayla.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, all, my name is Kayla Powell, coming to you from Iowa. I feel like I've experienced the whole NYTD continuum. Took the NYTD survey at 17, 19, and 21. I'm a federal NYTD reviewer. I'm the NYTD coordinator in the state of Iowa, and then also the NYTD peer group lead with the Capacity Building Center for States. And I'll pass it to Haley.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haley Dalia, and I am one of the supporting writers for one of the publications. And I am also a NYTD reviewer, and I will pass it over to Leroy.
Thank you, Haley. Hi, everyone. This is Leroy Barrola Soto. I'm calling in from Texas. I have been a NYTD reviewer since 2018, and I was a co-writer in this project. And I'll pass it down to Elliot.
Hi all, my name is Elliot Hinkle. I use they, them pronouns. I've been a NYTD reviewer since probably 2015. I've been around for a minute, also took the NYTD survey at 17 a long time ago. I'm going to be our MC today and also had the pleasure of reviewing the products that these fine folks have put together. I'm so excited to share them with you today. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Maya.
Hi everyone, my name is Maya Hayari. I was one of the contracted staff that supported the co-creation of these Knighted in Practice resources. I just want to take a minute to acknowledge the Knighted reviewers who supported this work but could not join today, David Hall and Michael Davis Thomas. I also want to mention the work of the other contractors who supported the development of the resources, Caitlin Franke, Susanna Moore, Logan Berg, Brooke Ann Maroney Lupe, Brenda Corsi, and Brittany Butler. Now I'll pass it to Elliot to announce the titles of these exciting new resources.
All right, here we go. So our new NYTD or National Youth and Transitions Database in practice, we will have tips for engaging 17-year-olds in the NYTD survey, tips for using technology to locate and engage 19 and 21-year-olds in the NYTD survey, tips for using social media to locate and engage young people in the NYTD survey. And coming soon, tips for states in developing data snapshots using the National Youth and Transitions Database data. So we'll talk about these more today. You'll get to experience some background on how they were created from the writers themselves. But we can go to the next slide. Of course, you'll want to know where to locate these, so you'll go to the link that's on the screen. It will also be in the chat for you, but also if you look on your screen and you have your phone, we'll give you a minute. If you scan that, it's a QR code that you'll be able to scan, and it'll take you directly to the link. And on that page, you'll be able to find these different tools where you can view them online or download them, share them with others. We hope they're helpful to you and can make it far and wide out there to the folks who need them. So again, visit that website, scan the QR code, and find all of the resources we're sharing with you today. And then I'm going to move us on to our next slide. We'll talk about the background. So the background of NYTD. What is the National Youth and Transitions Database? So it is a mandatory federal reporting system that's designed to collect data from states on young people who are served by state agencies that administer the John H. Chafee Foster Care Program for Successful Transition to Adulthood. It includes demographics, the services young people receive, and the outcomes they experience as they transition out of foster care. These surveys are taken at 17, 19, and 21 and are really helpful in sort of seeing what is the experience young people are having in the services they should be receiving and how can we make them better. So with that, we'll move to our next slide. What is the NYTD Reviewer Program? JVS's Child Welfare Compliance Review Teams prepares and involves young people by recruiting, training, and offering technical assistance for them to become NYTD reviewers to support the Children's Bureau as part of the federal review team for NYTD reviews and other NYTD-related opportunities. So some of us have had the opportunity to go on reviews for many years now and really help states see what are they doing, what can they do better, and how can they work better with their young people to improve their system. And it's been a great joy to get to be a part of that. To be a little bit of the insiders with the insider perspective on the scene. We'll move on to our next slide. So now we'll go have an overview of the NYTD in Practice resources. And so I'm going to pass it over to Kayla to discuss the first of the NYTD in Practice resources, tips for engaging 17-year-olds in the NYTD survey. Kayla?
Thanks, Elliot. So I got to author this resource in partnership with Leroy, who's also on the line. This resource specifically addresses and provides tips about how to engage 17-year-olds in the NYTD survey. As if you administer NYTD in your state or have anything to do with NYTD, I'm sure you all can agree that how you engage youth at 17 then can influence and usually influences the way and the survey response rates at 19 and 21. So this resource was designed with that in mind, with really practical and tangible tips about what you can do before surveying 17-year-olds, while surveying 17-year-olds, and then what to do afterwards. So tips on before looks like what does identifying youth to take the survey look like? How is the survey instrument designed so that it is youth friendly? What are the different ways that youth can take the NYTD survey so that they have choice in how they participate in the NYTD process? And even tips on creating a brand for NYTD in your state, so you don't have, especially if your NYTD is in-house, you don't have to use your human services logo, which we know deters youth from taking the survey. And so how to create a visible presence in your state to help youth understand what NYTD is and what it does. And then tips for during survey administration includes some ideas around using informed consent, who is the person administering the survey, especially to 17-year-olds, what should training for the workforce look like, and asking follow-up questions. And then afterwards, some tips include follow-ups and how to close that feedback loop with young people so that they know how their information is being used. So in this brief, I know Leroy and I were super intentional about uplifting things that states are already doing, and I recognize several names on the line, so some of you may see some familiar ideas and try to give credit where credit was due. And we also wanted to make sure that these were like things that states could actually do. So super excited for you all to read this. And then I'll talk about the second brief too on the next slide. This one is titled Tips for Using Technology to Locate and Engage 19 and 21-year-olds in the NYTD survey. And shout out to Tim and Haley for authoring this resource together. Drop an emoji. This is such a common question. Like, how do you find youth at 19 and 21? And Haley and Tim laid out some really great tips about how technology can be leveraged to do just that. So some tips for the NYTD workforce that are summarized in this brief, including building and maintaining a database of up-to-date contact information, while also making sure that that info is confidential and protected, which is super important to young people. Respecting and honoring a young person's preferred contact method. So if they tell you they want you to DM them or they want you to text them, that you're honoring that first option before moving on to others. How to use technology to facilitate the information collected in the NYTD survey. For example, there's a number of states, and some of you are on, that have created videos about this that you've shared back out with your young people. And there's also some federal videos, if you don't know, the NYTD Wrap. And then using technology to distribute and track financial incentives. So several states that I know have shifted to electronic gift cards, and so there's some tips in there about that. And then of course, providing choice to young people about how they're receiving their incentives. So there's a lot more examples and tips, but you'll have to go and read the brief to find out what those are. And now I'll pass it to Haley to talk about the next one.
Thanks, Kayla. The next resource is titled Tips for Using Social Media to Locate and Engage Young People in the NYTD Survey. And it provides information on the common social media platforms, tips for using social media to locate young people, and the benefits and challenges of using social media as an outreach tool to locate and engage young people to complete the NYTD survey. Some tips for the NYTD workforce that are summarized in this resource include collecting young adults' social media handles or their usernames when they transition out of care to more traditional contact information, such as phone numbers, email addresses, and mailing addresses, encouraging community building groups, messaging change, live sessions, and other interactive features, because young people may be more likely to engage in the survey if they see other young people are engaged. This resource also includes a ready-to-use checklist. The checklist includes steps for using social media to engage young people in the NYTD survey. Tangible examples are offered throughout the resource, as well as tips on how to protect young people's confidentiality and how to respect boundaries when using social media. And I'll pass it back to Kayla.
Thanks, Haley. All right, the final resource we have to share with you all is about tips for states in developing data snapshots using National Youth and Transition Database data. A lot of words. This one is coming soon, so you don't get to see it today yet, but there is snapshots on the federal website that you can take a look at if you don't already know about them. Each state has their own. And what this resource will do will highlight about how you can use those snapshots in your own state, and how you can even create snapshots that are unique to your state if you need further information. This product was informed by multiple planning calls that JBS had with 6 federal NYTD reviewers, other staff at JBS, and the Children's Bureau. And what we heard on those calls was that the data snapshots that are already on the federal website that I just spoke about were really helpful and insightful, that would be helpful to have a tip sheet to accompany them to really help states make meaning out of them and make sure that the data is actually being used. And then from a practice standpoint, I feel like this tip sheet is also super important just by honoring that if young people are going to tell us about their life experiences and give us this data, that we have an obligation and a duty to then use that data to inform policy and practice change that will then change those outcomes that they reported to us. So again, not ready yet, but is coming soon. So stay tuned. And I'll pass it to you, Elliot.
All right, thanks, Kayla. Thanks, team, for introducing the products. I'll just make a note here that we'll be taking questions towards the end of our session today as we get to the Q&A and the panels. So please hold your questions. I think we have a raised hand. It might have been a react, but just know we'll come back to questions here in a little bit. All right, so for our panel discussion, we're going to go through our topics today to have a little bit more discussion about the NYTD topic or the NYTD tools that we've had and their development and how we did that. So our first discussion is going to be about our collaborative approach. And with that, I have our first question, which is, what was the process to co-design the NYTD in Practice resource and how were roles established? So first, I'll turn to Maya from JBS, who can describe how JBS and CB initiated the process, and then we can hear from the writers. Maya?
Thanks, Elliot. So to provide the background on our process for co-designing these resources, first, we know that everyone involved has many other obligations and commitments in their lives, and we take all of that information into consideration when we begin a collaborative project like this one. For any project with NYTD reviewers, we take into consideration their interest in the topic, availability, and expertise in the topic. So to kick off the process, our first step was to reach out to the NYTD reviewers who we work with and find out about their interest in participating. And one thing that we did to streamline the process of gauging interest was we used a Smartsheet form, which is like a Google form or a SurveyMonkey form. It's an online platform where we were able to efficiently collect information from everyone who might be interested in writing these NYTD documents. The form asked if the person was interested in participating, and if yes, which topic they wanted to write about, and whether or not they were interested in being the lead writer or supporting writer. The form allowed also for a ranking feature so that the NYTD reviewers could rank their interests in each of the proposed topics of the NYTD in Practice resource. And then it was important for us to use those ranking results to match the writers with the topic that most interested them. And then among the JBS staff, we divided up to support the flow of communication and the project management aspects of the work. And all along the way, we drew on the expertise of CWCRT to initiate a successful collaboration between CB, JBS, and the NYTD reviewers. We understand that what worked well about this collaborative process is important. It's important to take note of it because the CB really values keeping the documents current and making sure that the information on technology, social media, and tips for engaging young people stays relevant. For example, in the creation of the social media document, we had to already change a name of one of the prominent social media companies from the beginning of the first draft to the end of the final draft. And because the CB does view these documents as needing to stay up to date and not static, this process is important for us to remember, take lessons learned, and be able to replicate in the future. Now I'll pass it back to Elliot.
Thanks, Maya. So I'll turn the question now to Kayla and Leroy, who co-wrote the resource on tips for engaging 17-year-olds in the NYTD survey. Kayla was a lead writer and Leroy was a supporting writer. Leroy, could you go first?
Thank you, Elliot. Yes, of course. So just as Maya explained the process, JBS did reach out to us with our answer to see our interest, to see if we felt comfortable with the topics. And we received continuous support from JBS, the Children's Bureau throughout the whole process, either brainstorming ideas and doing things of that nature. I decided to be the co-writer since I know that's a little bit of my weakness, but I also wanted to take on that challenge because it also gave us the opportunity for growth. And so I was excited that they offer us to the topic that was of interest to us and what we felt comfortable discussing. And with that, I'll pass it on to Kayla.
Thanks, Leroy. It was really fun to work with you on this. And kind of like just like Maya said, like that survey that they sent to us was super easy to fill out. And there was like reasonable turnaround time, so we weren't sitting and waiting for next steps. So appreciated that on being on like the author side of things. And then after we were identified, we were also matched up with 2 JBS staff. So for Leroy and I, that was Caitlin and Maya, who were incredibly helpful. And Leroy and I really got to focus on like the content of our resources that we were working on, while we got to leverage Caitlin and Maya to help us with like the formatting and the wordsmithing and kind of those things that don't really have anything to do with the actual meat of the resource. And I personally really thrived under a partnership like that. And so that collaboration was super helpful. And then I also appreciated being able to leverage not only my lived experience, but my professional experience to help author these resources. Because I feel like I have the luxury then of seeing the bigger picture of the child welfare system and understanding both like what young people need and then also the limitations and or maybe the boundaries of the system, while still prioritizing though always what young people need. And many of those kind of, and I think some of you will notice some of those things throughout the resources. Turn it back to you, Elliot.
Thanks, Kayla and Leroy. So now I'll turn the question to Tim and Haley, who co-wrote tips for using technology to locate and engage 19 and 21-year-olds in the NYTD survey. Tim was the lead writer and Haley was a supporting writer. Haley and Tim, would you two like to share about the process of co-designing these documents and how roles were established? Haley, I'll look to you first.
Thanks, Elliot. It started with an initial kickoff meeting with the JBS team to discuss roles and expectations, and then we scheduled some periodic check-ins to ensure the work was moving along. Tim and I would meet in between to discuss our ideas and start working on a draft, which we did simultaneously through Microsoft Online. As we got close to the final draft, the Children's Bureau also started joining the meetings. As it was mentioned earlier, some of the technology that we used in the process included Teams, Microsoft, Smartsheet, Doodle, text, emails, check-in meetings, etc. And now I'll turn it to Tim for him to share more about the process.
Yeah, thanks, Haley. So the process initially, was to meet with me and Haley and JBS to discuss really the big picture. And I think this is where we were able to kind of get oriented on what the brief aimed to achieve, have that conversation, and then set us on the right path for being able to create something that was going to not only be useful, but meet the spirit of what we were intending to do. One thing that was really, really helpful is that we had Haley and I had freedom and flexibility to just work on ideas and drafts and to set deadlines that were convenient to us. We're both busy, we both work. I take college classes for fun. And so, we were able to meet and do things at a time that was convenient to us. And so flexibility really is key. Being able to work, evenings, weekends, those types of things is important when it comes to this kind of work. Self-imposed deadlines are also very, very helpful just to make sure that regular progress was being made, and coming up with these deadlines ahead of time together with the writers, with JBS informed in this process, is something that laid out the expectations very clearly, and it was not an issue to go ahead and meet them. The last thing that was really, really important with this was using Microsoft Office Online to be able to do edits and make comments in real time. If anybody here has had the pain of suffering through version control, you know how difficult it is when somebody, you work on a document and upload it, and then somebody has went ahead and was like, oh, wait, no, I actually have something that's completely different. And your graphs and tables and fonts and everything is out of whack. And so being able to collaborate in real time and see those changes was just fantastic. So now I'll go ahead and give it back to Elliot.
All right, thank you, Haley and Tim. And shout out to Tim for taking college classes for fun. I admire you, honestly. So we also have some other writers who weren't able to join us today. So we wanted to make sure to highlight them and talk about their resource, and we also wanted to garner their sort of tips or feedback that they had from their process. So that was David Hall and Michael Davis Thomas, and they worked on tips for using social media to locate and engage young people in the NYTD survey. To summarize some of their responses, similar to what you've heard already, the lead writer took the lead in writing general ideas and creating a very rough draft for the support writers. Then the supporting writer and team went through shifting and editing and simplifying those thoughts. From there, it was a matter of repeating the cycle until we had all the information we wanted and gradually whittling it down to absolute essentials. This process was extremely flexible in that we were able to work on our own time, on our own pace, as long as things were submitted and edited by the due dates. And then they thought that using Microsoft Teams helped the process itself in that we were able to use other published products as examples, while the check-ins were the best for fleshing out the product and or receiving feedback and edits needed, especially those that required discussion or weren't as simple as just delete this line. So now I'll move into our next question for the panelists. In what ways did you feel prepared and supported to complete this work? And I'll turn it to Haley first.
Tim, the JBS team, and the Children's Bureau were all very supportive during the process. The JBS team would frequently reach out via email to share everything was moving along and to see if we needed any assistance or to be a thought partner throughout this process. And I will pass it over to Kayla.
And as an author, I really appreciated getting to determine what support looked like for me in this process. So personally, I didn't want a lot of check-in meetings. Rather, I, as long as it was working, wanted to communicate through email. And to Tim's point, since it was in Teams, using comments and just having comments addressed and responded to. And they were like Caitlin and Maya were always super quick to respond, like within 24 to 48 business hours. I felt like or just 24 to 48 hours period, all the time. And so having that constant feedback when it was reaching out for help was really kind and very appreciated. And overall, just the flexibility to decide what support looked like in this process was kind, because I think all of us, all of the different resources had different types of support. And then in the beginning, I was also given very clear parameters around the hours I had access to work on these, what the timelines are, the deadlines that we got to help decide on, which I also appreciated. And what I most appreciated is the autonomy, and that they really trusted us with the content and they didn't try to alter that. So they didn't try to minimize any of our ideas or try to change them. They just really supported us to further flesh out what that looked like. And that kind of freedom was really refreshing. Tim, what about you?
Thanks. Yeah, I felt very supported by JBS. And as Kayla just mentioned, I felt like I had the trust that was necessary to do the work that was expected of me. Although I have, a great deal of institutional knowledge, and on the brief I worked Haley and I worked on specifically, a lot of that comes from the work that I do as a researcher here at the University of Texas. And so being able to have that trust, and once we met with JBS initially, talked big picture, I laid out all the lessons that I had learned in my professional job to be able to translate that over into this NYTD related work. And I think that having that transparency from JBS as well, with like, this is how much time we're budgeting for this project, and where we'll need to be. It was excellent. JBS has always been a great partner in being supportive in all the work that I've ever done with them, going back to, I guess, 2013, 2014 or so. And so it's been fantastic. No issues there. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Leroy and Kayla, who are going to close out this question for us.
Thank you, Tim. And just like my colleagues have said, I felt prepared since the very beginning because of my experience working alongside JBS. They treat us as actual partners throughout the years that I've been working alongside them. And also they give us like continuous feedback, professional development. And I think what really helped me out as well was really working alongside Kayla, who's I worked with in different projects. And so I think that made me also really comfortable that we became colleagues, friends, but also professionals that have the same mission for this work. And so I want to thank Kayla for that. And with that, I'll pass it for her to Kayla, who will summarize from some of her other peers.
Thanks, Leroy. Also for this question, wanted to uplift what the authors who couldn't be here had to say. So one author said that I felt extremely supported via the whole team we had. The JBS staff allowed us to focus on the big picture and content while they almost acted as our document godmothers, and formatting, preemptively discussing things they knew would come up had to be addressed, like feedback from the Children's Bureau, keeping us on schedule with addition or deletion of content, suggestions of what to be edited, etc. Aside from once we got to the point of having to get indiscriminately picky with chopping off the fat in our content, very descriptive, there really wasn't ever a time where I felt things were difficult or I didn't know how to move forward. Pass it back to you, Elliot.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we're going to go to our next question. What challenges did you encounter and how were they addressed when collaborating on this work? Kayla, back to you.
So personally, and as a human, I initially got really tip heavy when drafting the first go at my resource, and it was entirely too long. I also wanted to include tips in ours that weren't necessarily within the scope of the resource that I was writing about 17-year-olds, but have been assured that more will be coming. So narrowing down my focus was an individual challenge that I had in trying to identify what are the best tips to include in this resource at this time and which ones are also globally applicable to like all states and jurisdictions. So that required a lot of intentionality and conversation, and really happy to have Leroy help with that part of it, to be a thought partner in those decisions. And then another challenge is I think we all have dreams about what we want things to look like, but then there's like what's actually can happen and what realistic is. So making sure that all the tips were practical for states to implement was also not so much a challenge, but just something that took a little bit extra intentionality and work, I think, and making sure that they aligned with the capacity that we know jurisdictions to have. And I'll pass it to you, Haley.
I would say that we had minimal challenges while we were editing our first draft and getting live feedback from the Children's Bureau. One of the things that was pointed out was ensuring the language and the examples that we use could be applied in all states, especially ones that were more strict and didn't have as much leniency in terms of forms of payment for young people that participate in the survey. But we were able to adapt to that and give, equitable suggestions. And I will pass it over to Tim.
So I didn't have any challenges working on the brief that I was initially assigned to with Haley, but I did, after a little while, I was asked to step in and help with the further development of another brief that was generated. And, there was so much that had already been decided, and I joined a little bit later. I didn't feel super, comfortable coming in and imposing all of my ideas on their existing work, even though I ended up doing that the very first meeting after I was doing that. But, I feel like I try to make space for other people, and it's not just my ideas and what I want. And so I was just a little bit more cognizant and asking someone like me to, take a seat back and be quiet. That sometimes is a tall order, but I was able to do that. So yeah, that was really the only challenge that I had. I'm going to go ahead and give it to Leroy, and Leroy and Haley will close this question out for us.
Thank you, Tim. And just like some of my peers, I also had like a personal problem. It was me. English is my second language, so I also tend to sometimes get so excited with writing something. I go off topic, something like there's something we can add, something we can enhance on. But we also had to remember that these tips, these documents were made to be accessible to the states and those who work in the NYTD field. And I think what really helped me was, again, having the support from JVS, Kayla especially, and Maya, Caitlin. I think that really helped me with that obstacle that I had in Haley, but this is what we're discussing in this one. We'll have other opportunities for other topics, and I was like, great, that really helps me now focus on what we're really focusing on this specific topic. And so I really appreciate that. Um, and also what helped me was that we were able to ask questions throughout. Like sometimes we will get feedback from the Children's Bureau and from JPS, but we also had the ability to ask them questions about their feedback as well. So I think that really helped a lot. And with that, I'll pass it to Haley, who will give us a summary of written responses from other writers.
Some of the points that the other writers had were, while collaborating on this project, the main challenge I encountered was determining the balance between content for public viewing and specialized content reserved for the more applied approach using a checklist. We navigated this by initially including all relevant information, then collaboratively deciding which portions to streamline through discussions, approvals, and adjustments. Now I will pass it back to you, Elliot, for our final question for the collaborative approach.
All right, thanks everyone. Here is our last question on this section, and if you're listening in, feel free to start thinking of what questions you might have, because we'll have time for Q&A right after this, for this first section. So what were some lessons learned from this process? Kayla, could you start us?
I think the big thing, and I think what many of us knew coming into this, especially those who have experience doing United in our state, that there's such a need for these kind of resources that have like the really practical and tangible tips about like, okay, we know what United is, but like, how do we do it, and how do we do it well, and how do we honor young people in that process? And then one of the other lessons learned is just the value of quote unquote crowdsourcing information and really just leveraging what other states are already doing, rather than trying to create new ideas from scratch, or trying to go back later and figure out what those good ideas are. Part of the process was having the larger United reviewer pool review all of the resources. And I think a really cool thing in the future would be to invite the United reviewers to be a part of also the design process for these, to help crowdsource some more of that information. Because we received a lot of really great ideas in the review stage, that it just, because of spacing and time, we weren't able to implement all of them or integrate all of them into our resource. So I think that would be a lesson learned on my end. I'll pass it to you, Haley.
Yeah, so some of the things that I learned were just, how much technology is out there to assist states in the process of engaging young people, and the importance of like checking in with your team periodically. I would say like if states are trying to do this back home and on the ground, I think the level of assistance that young people need will really vary on like personal sort of where they are in their lives. If I was authoring something when I was 16, the level of technical assistance and support that I need would look very different than what I need now. And Tim and I are both researchers in our day job. And so we didn't have to have such a hands-on approach because we knew that we could, work on things independently and then check in when the time came. And I'll pass it over to Tim.
Yeah, I think that as far as what I learned from this process, I really think that what I learned the most is that this reaffirms that some people can just thrive when given trust and autonomy. Haley and I worked really, really well together, and I worked well together with David and Michael on the other brief that we worked on. It's really important that people understand, I think, that some people may be in different stages, right? Some people might need a little bit more support, and some people might, you give them a task and let them go do it and they'll get it done. And it's always important either way to just trust that people can do things, and to ensure that they have autonomy in being able to make decisions on what works best for them. And yeah, so let's go ahead and pass this on to Leroy and Kayla, who will close this question out for us.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so for me, it wasn't a lesson learned, but it was something that I wanted to showcase. It was how I worked with Maya before, like in the past, in a professional capacity. And I like how when we started this project, Charity knew how she would support me. I'm the kind of person that always questions myself. I doubt myself so much, like, is this right? Is this wrong? But Maya had everything planned out without me noticing, and that really helped. And I appreciate that because, like I said, when somebody's questioning themselves, we feel like we don't belong in this space. But Maya uh, made me see that I did belong in that space. So I just wanted to showcase that with the response for this question. And with that, I'll pass it to Kayla, who will provide a summary.
So one of our authors who couldn't be here said that the writers learned that providing a checklist and the resource on tips of using social media is a distinctive and applied approach to support states. Elliot, back to you.
All right, so with that, the moment you've been waiting for, our first Q&A. This section is about our collaborative approach. So our questions for this section is about the collaborative approach. In our next slide and questions for our panelists, we'll be talking about the importance of inclusion. So I want to start and open it up to folks listening in. If you have a question for us on this first portion of the presentation, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Feel free to type them in now and we'll see what you have for us. We'll give it a minute to see if any load. All right, we're going to drop the link to the resources in the chat in just a minute. Let's see, from Victor, how did you create the values necessary around equity and inclusion, especially on the framework design of this? We may get into this a little bit in the inclusion section next, but does anyone want to take a pass at just briefly touching on this one?
This is Tim. I can touch on this a little bit specifically by how JBS structured interest in these things. I think that JBS was very cognizant on seeing where people's comfortability was, on who wanted to participate in the development of these resources. Not only figuring out interests, but also capacity and understanding what they needed, like what level of support, supervision, assistance, all of that. And I think that understanding people's needs and where they are is, it does fit in the inclusion realm, I do think.
I think the other thing that you'll notice by reading through all of the resources is that the value of empowering young people to choose who they are and to honor whatever they disclose is pretty clear. So and then also encouraging jurisdictions to then, like I just said, honor that. So if so we talk about youth identifying what their pronouns are, or what their names are, or who, like in some of the parts about the resources, it's about what backup information looks like, and it's empowering young people to identify that for themselves. So I think you'll see that value, just empowering young people to know who they are and to respect whatever they say.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing here that I feel really proud of for the group of us is that if you look at the documents at the bottom as well as at the top of the document, you'll see that the writers are named specifically on these documents to really call out their work, as well as their faces are at the top of the document to really let them shine. So I think that is equally valuable here to show that the people who put the work in are going to be on these documents. So thanks for your question, Victor. We got one from George. Says, big congrats. I managed a brief on Survey United, United survey at the start of United. It was drafted by one researcher. What a difference. Will these comments about collaborating co-design process be written in a brief or blog? Any thoughts there from our team?
Hi, I think that's a great idea. I think summarizing this information and everything that we're learning, this webinar is being recorded and will live someplace eventually. So I'm sure that we will take some of this information and summarize it in a way that will be useful for people to gain interest in.
Perfect.
Yeah, can I add something to
Yeah.
that as well? I just want to say, like, so I'm like a researcher in my day job, and this is something that I urge people to think about a lot in terms of like engaging youth early and as often as possible in these processes, especially design processes, because it's not the same thing to like go in and have like one researcher with no lived experience to just write a whole report and then bring people in at the end to say, oh, how do you feel about this once everything is already pretty much finalized? It's something very different to, lay the groundwork for them and give them the resources that they need so that they can inform it from the beginning and be a part of the writing process and the part of the design process. And I think that's like a very meaningful difference between like authentic youth engagement or engagement in general with any sort of like vulnerable population. Um, and I'm very grateful for you that you can like understand the difference as well. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Thanks, Haley. Last call for any questions on this section before we move into our next round of panel discussion on the importance of inclusion. And if not, that's okay. All right, I'll carry any ones that come in through the chat into our next discussion, but I'm going to move us forward to the importance of inclusion. So our first question is, what are the benefits of including people with lived expertise in developing and updating products? Haley, could you start for us?
So people with lived experience offer a unique perspective because they experience these things firsthand and they know what it's like to be contacted for surveys, studies, or follow-ups so they can best inform the space on best practices. Like I said, on a personal level, both Tim and I are researchers in our day jobs. And so combining both of our expertise and bringing in, like, I guess, the intersectionality of all of our identities has been especially helpful. And, and I'll hand it over to Tim.
Thanks, Haley. Yeah, there's just certain intangibles that people with lived experience bring to the table. It's hard for me to like tell you because it's kind of just my life and that's part of me. And so, but I can tell you that they're having the lived experience just really does give you an opportunity to see things and highlight things that otherwise might have gone unnoticed. And I see this in research meetings. I see this in child welfare policy discussions, things like that, where people they're going full speed ahead, and it's like, hold on, take a step back. Like, let's talk about this thing that people just aren't acknowledging right now. And unless you've had this type of experience, and again, not all lived experience is the same, and that's okay. But it just really gives you that ability to kind of see things that other people don't, because based on the experiences that you've had. Let me go ahead and see here. I'm going to hand it over to Kayla now.
So like I mentioned before, and to what Haley lifted up, I got to leverage both my lived and professional expertise for this project, which again was helpful to understand like the limitations and also the opportunities for both sides of NYTD, both like the professional side of the states administering the survey and then the youth side of like actually taking the survey. So provided like a really cool opportunity of having the full picture of what the reviews are, of what the purpose of NYTD is, and also the full picture of the child welfare system in general, and then what it actually feels like all on a human level. And sometimes, and I reflect on myself even as a professional in this work, that sometimes we gravitate towards doing things that are easy or take less time because our jobs do require a lot. But as someone with lived experience, I feel like it's always on my forefront about how important the little things are, like individual follow-up after a youth takes the NYTD survey, or the power of offering choice for a youth to take the NYTD survey, whether it be online or in person or over the phone, or getting to choose what your incentive is and making sure that that incentive actually lands in your mail or in your inbox within whatever time you said, and how youth really do remember when it takes longer than what you said. And I think that both Leroy and I had that shine through in our writing. And with that, Leroy, what do you think?
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, so I think one of the benefits I think was also that here, at least in our example of doing the night work, is that we're a very diverse pool of individuals and young professionals. So we each have our different backgrounds, we're a diverse group, and we all think differently. And sometimes we forget to include the voices of those who are different from us. And I appreciate how in here, even though, like I said, English is my weakness sometimes, I don't know how to say things right or how to write professionally. I was able to speak about that with Kayla and those professionals around us, and they really helped ensure that my voice was really part of this work. So they didn't say like, no, Leroy, that does not sound good. Like, we'll change it completely. So we all worked together to make sure that it was what I was trying to really write in that document, and that was, I think, really meaningful. I think another thing was that we were engaged throughout, before, during, and after this whole project, because it was a months-long project that we were working on these products. And I think that was also showcasing how really intentional both JBS and the Children's Bureau were on this work. I always thought, before I work in this field, I always thought that the federal government always tells us what to do, right? But I think in this case, they were really great partners, and they really listened to what we wanted to write about, and they were really intentional on this as well. So I truly appreciated that. And with that, I'll pass it to Haley, who will give a summary on written responses.
Yeah, so some of the things that Michael and David wanted to say were the benefits of including us in the process is that we're constantly thinking about things like, would I want to read this? Is this too boring? Does this give them applicable information, etc. Many child welfare products manage to talk about an issue without actually giving you any tools to address it. And the few times that they do give you a tool, it's more of a, here's what the problem is, here's why it's a problem, and here are the options. But it won't tell you how to actually go through those options, work through those options, I'm sorry. Incorporating individuals with lived experience enriches the development and refinement of products. Our perspectives consistently questioned whether the content would engage the audience, provide actionable insights, and ensure its practicality, an aspect occasionally lacking in similar initiatives. And now I'll hand it over to Maya.
I'm not sure I can add anything to these responses. Including people with lived expertise when developing products on how to engage young people with lived experience is the only way to do this work. Including their expertise leads to authentic products and products that are actionable and meaningful to both the United workforce and children and families they serve. I'd also like to add that it's really important to do the legwork to ensure there's a compensation structure in place and that the expertise being provided will be acknowledged. For example, as Elliot mentioned, each of the Knighted in Practice resources includes a citation at the bottom of the document where we acknowledge the names of the writers who contributed their time and expertise to pull all this work together. I'll hand it back to Elliot.
Thanks, Maya. So now we're going to move on to our second question. What are tips for collaborating with young people with lived experience? When we're thinking about some of the things that have already been mentioned, like how it is important to keep them up to date on what's happened, telling them this is what we decided to do with your information, staying in touch with them and keeping them up to date. So Haley, could you start for us on what are tips for collaborating with young people with lived experience?
Yeah. So I would say you have to allow young people to decide whether they would like to disclose their lived experience, especially if they're, whether they're writing a blog, whether they're contributing to a publication. Not everyone is always comfortable with that. And so you have to talk with them to really get an understanding of if they want to disclose that or not. And you would also want to let them know how their expertise will be and follow up with them throughout the process to let them know where things are. Give them the opportunity to also review the final product. In general, include them in as many parts of the process where possible and pay them adequately for the work that they perform. This model is also important because it allows young people to not merely, share their story, but to use their personal experiences to better inform policy and practice, and allows them to develop professional skills along the way. And I'll pass it over to Kayla.
I have 5 tips when specifically thinking about collaborating with folks with lived experience when creating products. And some of them are going to sound redundant because I think we've all been talking to them already, but provide context and limitations up front. So, like to Haley's point, how many hours? What are the deadlines? What's the purpose? Who all will be involved? Second is to be flexible. Support looks different for everyone, and when you can support people in the way that they need, the outcome will just be better. The third is to provide agency and autonomy. I think all of us on this line have already talked about how much we flourished under that kind of support, where we were all respected as experts in this area. 4 is to include a squad and not just engaging one person with lived experience or 2 people with lived experience, but starting with a group of folks with lived experience to conceptualize an idea, having folks carry that work forward, and then bringing it back to that squad to review and make sure that it's aligns with what's needed. And then 5, to what Haley said, compensate fairly and give credit where credit's due. And shout out to Elliot for making sure that happened in this process. They really championed that. Pass it to Tim.
Thank you. I think that one tip that I really have for people is to balance accountability and deadlines with autonomy. A little trust really does go a long way. And I think that the work that we came out with it kind of shows that this is important and it's meaningful. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I just have to bring it out now that I saw Talisa Burt's question about, without contributing with a lived experience without feeling put on the spot, limited to that specific issue or tokenized. I think this is one area that the reason I keep bringing up autonomy and trust and things like that is because having this lived experience and doing this work, you might be able to read between the lines with what we're saying, but I'll just say it outright. Having been in foster care and having that lived experience and then working, there is a perception that is there that you are going to be tokenized or that people are going to be scrutinizing you. And the reason why I'm so big on autonomy and being able to have the ability to make own decisions, set deadlines, and have that trust is because you don't want to be perceived as oh, that foster kid, right? That person that was in foster care. And it's really important that when working with people that have this lived experience, that we treat them as we would treat any other colleague, that treat them like any other professional, because they just happen to have that unique perspective that can inform and really advance the work that's being done. So I want to go ahead and give this over to Leroy.
Thanks, Tim. And like my colleague said, I think one of my biggest tip is compensation. I know a lot in this field, we always say well, can you do this for us for free? Can you come to this page? Can you write this? But we're never treated as equal professionals in the field. And I think that's one of the things that we need to change, the way we do that kind of work, where we don't compensate the lived experience experts for their expertise. And also because they've also been through a lot, and sometimes this work does re-traumatize young people, and it can trigger memories, maybe not in this specific product, but maybe in other products that your agency may be working on. So that's something to really think about and things to consider. Another thing is to provide a safe space for continuous feedback. I know I appreciated how everybody was always providing opportunities for us to meet as a group, individually. I know that because of my work, because of my regular full-time job, sometimes I needed to contact Maya after 5 p.m. So I appreciated how she made time for me to ask questions and to meet with her as needed, and everybody else on the team. And also to make sure that your voice is not lost. Like I mentioned earlier, as somebody who sometimes struggles to send my message across, that was something that I sometimes worry about, is this agency trying to change what I'm trying to say to what they want to say? And so I like how JBS and the Children's Bureau really handled that in this space, and everything was very inclusive, very well done, where what I needed to say was put on that document. So thank you for that. And just ensuring that you were engaged throughout the whole process. I mentioned that earlier, but I really want to reinforce that one because sometimes we think we're just engaging youth just because we're like, hey, can you help us write this? But then we don't contact them afterwards, like, hey, this is going on, or what do you think about this afterwards? Or this is the feedback we're getting. What do you think? What we might need to change or edit? I think that's also very important to make sure to continue having those conversations and engagement going. And with that, I'll pass it to Kayla for more written summaries.
Yeah, one of our authors who couldn't be here said to treat them like professionals and they'll get the work done. If they aren't at the capacity to provide that service, then train them up or go in knowing that it's an opportunity to learn on the job, and they will be able to do so afterwards. Maya, I'm going to pass it to Maya to provide perspectives from staff.
Thank you. So some helpful tips that the JBS team learned, I'm summarizing from everyone who supported this work, is to be mindful. We all come from different backgrounds. It's important to create a safe and supportive environment. Another tip is to remain flexible. We've said it throughout the webinar, particularly around scheduling, which you think is a minor piece of it, but it's actually a pretty big piece of it with a large group of contributors. So we schedule after work hours if we have to support others and their time. We send notes after each call to summarize next steps and action items. This really allowed the writers to focus on the content, as was said, and spend less time managing logistics and project management. Another tip is to encourage everyone to pick their roles, as we said earlier, based on their availability, expertise, and interest. And the last tip is really to commit to building the professional relationships and the trust to support a successful collaboration. It can take extra time to collaborate with others. Being mindful and building your project timelines to accommodate not only the logistical side of scheduling, but also allowing multiple entities and people to develop, review, edit, and provide feedback, all multiple steps to creating drafts and finalizing a product. You need to accommodate other people's time and build that rapport to make the work successful. And I'll pass it back to Elliot. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. I'll just say one more note here as a shout out to the Children's Bureau and JBS staff and Catherine Kolbicki, especially for conversations we were able to have at a training earlier this year as we were working on these products to say, we would like to have our names on these. We want to have credit for the work that we do and really have a conversation that the Children's Bureau took seriously and had even more conversations to figure out how do we do this right and had that conversation with us. And so I hope that that is a model for other folks to see too, more and more, that we can give credit to folks for the work that they do. So with that, let's move on to question 3. How can states model this collaborative approach of engaging and elevating the expertise and voices of people with lived experience in child welfare? So I'm going to turn this first to Haley.
So I think similar work should already be going on around the state in terms of engaging young people with lived expertise, whether that's serving on youth councils or youth boards, or offering their perspectives on a variety of different topics. But I think you have to genuinely listen to young people, because if they feel that you are genuine, they will let you know what they need and what their recommendations are around it. And I think it's also super helpful, and I know that this has been mentioned multiple times during this webinar, but let them know like how you are going to be using that information and how you are going to follow up with them, do check-ins. Don't just let it like fall off the side of the earth and it's something that's never addressed again. I think it's very important to young people to know what's happening with the information that they share and the expertise that they share. And I'll pass it over to Kayla.
So for me, this project was really meaningful, and I do think that a lot of states are already doing this kind of work, whether it's working with young people to create the 5-year plan for child welfare, or creating their state's own NYTD data snapshot, or writing a foster care bill of rights, whatever it is. I think our country is rich with these examples, and I see Mitch from Hawaii and Fallon from Foster Club on here who could probably do their own webinar about how they're doing this back in their states, because those are some really great examples. But I think states could learn from this process by realizing that young people just needed to the opportunity and the support needed to actually follow through. And whoever is going to be supporting the youth really needs to have the capacity and the flexibility and the willingness to provide the support that the young person needs, and that whatever organization or system is going to be providing the opportunity has the resources available. So the compensation and paying for that staff support and things like that. And then something else that I think states could keep in mind when trying to model this process is, and to the comment about tokenization, is one of the reasons why this was meaningful for me is because I wasn't engaged just because I have lived experience. I was engaged because I have lived experience, and I'm also really into NYTD, and I also have professional expertise with NYTD, and I'm a NYTD reviewer. So there were all these other things at play that made it super meaningful, and that for me is what prevented me from ever feeling tokenized. And then I also think that throughout the whole process, and I think states would really need to be willing to do this, is letting young people drive, because there were several moments throughout where we were kind of challenging the approach that was being taken, or like what the next step was, or how many hours that we could actually have, and it was really well received. So I think that for states to model that, having that capacity as well is also helpful. I'll pass it to Tim.
Thanks, Kayla. And that's really well put. I really do think that states should invest in this population and get them in a position where they can make high quality products, provide important perspectives, and offer significant contributions to child welfare policy and practice in the states that they live in. What we see, or what I see all too often, unfortunately, are organizations, they'll bring people together, young people together, for, a single one-time event where they'll eat pizza and have a real sort of superficial 1 hour conversation on how to improve child welfare. And then that's pretty much where the engagement begins and ends. And I think that it's a little unfortunate to see that. I mean, I get people trying to do what they are trying to do, but it's unfortunate to see that just because there's a lot that people can bring to the table. I think, in order to move past this, it's really imperative that states develop infrastructure to empower young people, provide them with resources, trainings, and opportunities to develop professionally, and consider how this newly formed infrastructure should operate within the child welfare system itself, rather than separate from it. And that's really important, is that this shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a designated like youth voice type place. It should be something that is integrated into the way that the child welfare system operates. I've been able to see this firsthand when I first started my career working at the Texas Department of Family Protective Services, being able to lead, a youth leadership council or youth advisory board, as people might know them, and seriously, like, actually make significant changes with that at the legislative level, things like that. These are the types of things that we can do when we empower people and build infrastructure within our child welfare system. But you got to move past, the let's have, conversations once a year or so, and then never talk about it till the next time. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Leroy.
Thanks, Tim. And yes, I have a similar comment on this response. I think the most important thing to remember from this and a tip for states is to really have you as actual co-creators, to really start thinking of what is it that we have right now where you can help us, which is probably everything, because there's a saying, I don't know how it goes, but it says nothing about us without us. And so I feel that's one of those things, like there's, like, for example, service plans. Do you help you create those service plans, or do you create them on your own? The certain publications about flyers for you, are those created by your agency marketing department, or are you included in those designs? Thanks to the work that I do, I've been able to see youth who have really shown that there are different talents, and some of them are like, hey, Leroy, thank you for allowing us to design a logo for the group. Leroy, thank you for letting us write. That's what I like doing. So that's what JBS did in this case. They looked at us in our professional ways. They used our different skills to collaborating in our different capacities in whatever our strengths are. And I think that's really important, not only to really help sharpen those skills from the young people, but also showing them, hey, like, we're doing this alongside you. We are sharing space. We're equal partners in this, and nobody hears about anybody else. And I think that I've seen that work really wonderfully. And I think that if states can really start doing things like that, I think it will be very meaningful, but also really create that change that we're trying to see in this challenging field. And I'll pass it to Haley.
I'm going to provide summary responses from our additional writers. So to foster engagement and listen to the voices of individuals with lived experience, you should consider investing in the training and empowerment of their youth advocates. This not only equips them with necessary skills, but also positions them for success within the field, aligning with their eventual roles in social services. And now I'll hand it back to Elliot for questions from the audience about the importance of inclusion or any other topics related to today's webinar's content.
Thanks, Haley, and thanks, team, for your great responses, your reflections, and just helping us sort of understand how this works. And I hope everyone listening is sort of hearing that this is about the tip sheets or the documents that have come out today, but it's also about NYTD, and it's also about both, that the way that we've been engaged in this work is the way that we hope states and jurisdictions will also engage their young people in NYTD and other work like this. So hopefully this has given you some ideas. With that, I'll look to our questions. I think our speakers sort of spoke actually pretty well. You were reading our minds, George and Lisa, to your questions, but I just want to give them a chance to speak further on those if they have any other things to add. So George had sort of asked about sharing an example of ways that you sort of pushed boundaries with government and sort of pushed the envelope or the envelope there. And I think we sort of talked about that, but if anyone has anything else there, or can someone speak to what Tim spoke to of how they prefer to be engaged about contributing lived experience without feeling put on the spot, limited to that specific issue or tokenized? Any additional thoughts to add there from anyone?
I think some boundaries that were pushed for government really align with incentives. Not all states are set up to accommodate what youth prefer for incentives. Like there are some states that don't incentivize, or they only incentivize by a paper check, which is wild. Or the state cannot do electronic gift cards. Like it has to be a different way. So that was being pushed. And I also think just the use of social media in general is another way, and just having a whole resource about how social media is so beneficial for NYTD, when there are some state agencies out there that ban the use of social media within their state agency, and why sometimes contractors are pulled in to help. So I think those are two examples of what boundaries exist within state government as it relates to NYTD.
Thanks, Kayla. Anyone else? Or any other questions from the audience about anything that we've covered today? You'll also see that Lupe put in the chat the link again to those publications if you'd like to look at it. Teresa said, how do you deal with privacy issues related to social media use? Anyone have experience or thoughts on that one?
I can talk a little bit about that, Elliot, because I worked on part of that brief, and in that brief, that resource there, we do discuss that a bit, and I encourage you to read that. Social media is one of those things that it's a little, not to give everything away in the resource, and also because I want people to go and read them. It's one of those things that it's a little bit tricky, right? Because not only do you have to deal with the agency, your state child welfare agencies, resources, or guidelines and policies on that, but you also have to find out what the young person's preferences are as well, right? Sometimes people may not want anything to do with foster care on their social media, and those choices have to be respected, right? Other times people might, there are opportunities for conversations regarding privacy settings, like if people, are publicly searchable, what they're showing, if their profile is locked to random strangers that could just come across them. Privacy in social media, there's a lot to it. But what's important is that we now have some resources available that we can go ahead and start to look at and it's not going to end the conversation, right? It's not the tome of social media, but it's definitely a resource to help orient you in a way that I think will help answer some of those questions.
Thanks, Tim. Anyone else? Or any other questions from the audience? Give it just a minute or so more, and a second or two more, I should say. All right, well, I'll move us to our last slide as we wrap up today. I know no one is upset if we end a little bit early. So on this slide, you'll see the link again, where you can go to the practice resources on the CB's website. You can scan this QR code with a camera on your phone to get there if you haven't already saved the link, if you haven't already sent it to all of your friends and family to go read all of these resources. You can do that now. We really, really appreciate your time joining us today, listening to our wonderful reviewers and panelists. Thank you so much for all of the insight that you shared and the tools that you put together. Thank you to the Children's Bureau for letting us do this work with you and alongside you, as well as JBS and your staff. You have been amazing to us and helped us really get there. And thanks to all of you for listening in today and supporting this work and doing the work you're doing in your states. It's important. And the young people you work with really deserve that good work. So with that, we'll sort of wrap up today. If there's any lingering questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But otherwise, I think we've got one from Jennifer that says, thank you all. I think much of what you shared today has a lot of relevance as we consider how to substantively work to sustain meaningful integration of young people into how we do our work. Absolutely. And Ashley from Foster Club says, we just want to thank you all for the great work you're doing, the youth and adult partnership work and the NYTD efforts all around. I will be sharing these tips and tricks with our peer navigators that are lived experience leaders, co-leading and supporting the NYTD outreach efforts in Oregon. Thank you. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.